1:15, and we are back in session. We'll begin our afternoon session with an update on community affairs and legislative activities, and I'll turn to Mr. Freeburg McKinney and Mr. Julie Pittman.
Good afternoon, Chair Davis, Superintendent Truitt, Vice Chair Duncan, Lieutenant Governor Robinson, Treasurer Falwell, board members and advisors, our fellow colleagues here at DPI and the State Board, and partnerships across this great state and the extended Shire. Welcome to the inaugural edition of the District Voices and Visits team and the new and improved Community Affairs Update. I'm honored today to share alongside my colleague, Julie Pittman, on our continued efforts for the District Visits and Voices team, which is a partnership between the Superintendent's Leadership Team, the Regional Teacher of the Year team, regional case managers, district and regional support, and our own Maureen Stover, the North Carolina State Teacher of the Year, in building bridges with district leadership teams through a listening and learning tour. This initiative strengthens the feedback loop between the State Board of Education and the Department of Public Instruction, and being a conduit for needs and resources and support, as well as celebrating the successes and challenges with a broader statewide audience. We believe this is a foundational strategy in strengthening the relationship between all levels of the statewide educational system. And we are humbled for you to hear of the work and the inspiration and the stories of our school districts and their people.
Our goal for this work is to collaborate with multiple members, as my colleague Freeburg McKinney said, to be able to get a glimpse of how schools are serving our students right now. And this month, we are excited to highlight how teachers and students continue to extend partnerships across our state within their own communities. This month, I'm going to borrow from my good friend and colleague, Dr. Lynn Harvey, in her approach by giving it to you by the numbers. In the month of March, we have visited 15 districts, 39 schools, all 8 educational regions, and a charter school. That's a team total for this administration's year of 20 districts and over 50 schools. Let's begin by looking at some of those schools.
As you can see in the slide here representing Pitt County schools in the Northeast region, what we want to do is to share with you specific exemplary efforts that align to both the strategic plan of the State Board and Superintendent Truitt's priorities revealed today in Operation Polaris. Within this visit with Dr. Ethan Linker, Superintendent, we witnessed multiple examples of human capital with their human capital pipeline development and their R3 Recruit, Retain, and Award. We listened to a great presentation by Dr. Seth Brown and Dr. Thomas Feller. This also led into district and school transformation, where they're maximizing teacher effectiveness and teacher leadership with multiple classroom leaders and a strong BT program that really reflected communities of practice and a robust compensation model to support. We then journeyed to Pitt Technical Academy and Pitt County Early College and listened to workforce development and witnessed CTE programs, including the stories of Ruby and Carlos and an electrical systems class. Finally, we felt like there was a huge support for student support services and social emotional learning and student mental health, with instructional framework at IECHS, which is an innovation early college at ECU. And overall, this was a presentation that showed the successes and challenges of overcoming COVID's impact and making sure they ensure a high quality daily instruction.
The very next day, we traveled to Currituck County Schools. So we started our day with Superintendent Matt Lutz on an activity bus with the entire district leadership team and traveled on that bus on a ferry for 45 minutes to Knott's Island Elementary School, the same ride that several students have to take each day to get to school. We learned on this day how this geographically challenged district perseveres in normal times as well as through this pandemic. While at Knott's Island Elementary School, we heard from Principal Kevin Goins that our school is the community. We learned about virtual hybrid teaching and learning with effective teacher models, CTE pathways and credentials. We looked at a variety of schools and their principal leadership, and we had lots of interaction with their school board and many county commissioners and other community partners. In fact, we ate lunch with several of them at one of their local favorite restaurants. We did take a ride throughout the entire district on that activity bus, and we're able to see how some schools have to travel. You can see in the far bottom right-hand corner the bus on the ferry, but how some school children have to travel not just on a bus on a ferry, but through the state of Virginia to be able to get to parts of their district in order to go to school, and they do so every day. I'd also like to lift up Angela Rodriguez, who's their child nutrition director, who ate lunch with us on that day. I've worked with Angela for many months, about a year now, in being able to get grant funding and partnership work to make sure that all of the children in their district are fed, and her ability to utilize buses to feed all of her kids and make sure those who were the highest needs got meals every single day since March the 14th of last year. We also traveled to the Southeast region and Jones County School. I'd like to start off by quoting our student, Brianna Powell, who took us on a tour of the school, saying that this school is worth sharing. We are making an impact on students and the community. She shared with us on that day that not only is she proud of her school and proud of the teachers who are there, but that those teachers encouraged her to become a future teacher. So we're really excited to welcome her into the profession when she graduates from college. While at this state-of-the-art school, we were able to see innovation, how the school itself is energy producing for their community. I think if you go to the next slide, you'll be able to see some of the solar panels that are on top of the school, and they're able to produce enough energy at the school to give energy to other places in their community. And all of this is so impressive, along with their workforce development, their ROTC programming, their student-led design. But it is the people in this school, and these people, the teachers, the leaders, the SROs, the cafeteria staff, the board members, the custodians, the teacher assistants, the counselors, all whom we met on that day, and the students, who were truly remarkable, and the most important takeaway that we took from Jones County.
Our next stop in the Southeast region was Pamlico County Schools, a true partnership of home and community. We also took a bus ride on Pamlico County Schools with Dr. Lisa Jackson, their superintendent. And I remember one specific quote where she said that we are unstoppable. And two of the main pieces that we really saw within this visit was their dedication to accountability and testing, including a graduate profile, workforce development pieces where we got to visit Chef Keith Reese Sr.'s culinary arts class, kind of bringing back to my earlier days before my lateral entry transition, and also spoke to the JROTC program with Commander Robinson and Master Chief Matthews, and really learned how that program was an incubator for leadership, and really bringing in 30% of their students take at least one JROTC class there. The most impactful piece about this visit was listening to the resilience through displacement. And I remember Superintendent Truitt talking about the resiliency of the Southeast region, and they commented on this. Through floods, through natural disasters, through a pandemic, they have become crisis management specialists. And what this community has realized is that the schools are the stabilizing force and the courageous efforts of overcoming these disasters, which have names: Irene, Matthew, Dorian, and Florence. And so while these schools represented that stabilizing force, she also said that our people are what make our schools, and the students are that hub. Next, we journey to the North Central region to Vance County Schools. This needs no introduction with our superintendent advisor on the board, Dr. Anthony Jackson. Again, if you have never heard him speak about his schools in a setting that really allows him to show the theory of action that Vance County School has, the catalyst for kids and lighting that fire and providing flexible options for their students, whether that be remote, digital, personalized, that these are true incubators of innovation in Vance County Schools as well. I remember him saying that we deputize the community to create a Vance formation. And this is what they revealed throughout the day, whether it's accountability and testing. If you'll notice down in the right-hand corner, one of Superintendent Truitt's priorities that she's talked about is developing that graduate profile. Vance County has an incredible example there. Also looking at non-traditional pathways to graduation, including their Advance Academy, student support services with SEL boot camps, and also this idea of principal and teacher leadership that was provided by Principal Edward Ortega.
Also in the North Central region, we recently visited Person County. Superintendent Rodney Peterson highlighted his team of curriculum directors who embody and lead their E6 goal to educate, engage, and empower our students so that they can be enlisted, enrolled, or employed. We visited dual immersion classrooms led by global teachers, highlighting how they are meeting their human capital needs through innovative measures that are also advancing their student success. We saw teachers who were already immersed in the science of reading, leading literacy instruction for their students. We saw CTE teachers like Jeff Jennings, who inspire his students to create solutions for both his school and his community through employable skills. And then we saw, on the next slide, please, we also saw internships with businesses leading students through a journey to self-actualization, like Adam Wolf, who is an impressive one-of-a-kind. He has an impressive one-of-a-kind business with DreamWorks Motorsports, where people from all over the world come for service, and really the only kind of service that you can get in his shop there in Person County. Names that you would know from entertainment and from sports. But more importantly, through these internships, he's teaching life skills like dedication, hard work, communication, and he's teaching these kids that they matter. And he's teaching them that their education matters through Person County Schools. I love his quote, "Person High is my college. Some people give back to their colleges. I give back to my high school." And it's easy to catch the bug when you're provided opportunities. The charter school that we visited during this month was Henderson Collegiate Charter School. It's in Vance County. And I love what Eric Sanchez said about everything in his school culture, that feedback is essential for growth. And he thrives on that in coaching his teachers and in how his teachers coach their students, even how his own child coaches him and giving him feedback. We saw that they are 3 schools with one mission, and that is college for all. We were led through the entire day by 2 student leaders who talked to us about how all of their needs are met at the school, how they are pushed to succeed, how they are thinking about college from the moment they walk through the doors, that their teachers are working with them on college skills, and that they are giving them a path to prosperity that they would not normally have. We saw that they had student-centered design, that they had parent, student, and teacher partnership at every step of the way, and they have a unique opportunity for their students called a student paycheck, where students get money deposited in their paycheck, and it's not real money, it's figurative money, but it allows them to actually see that good character, good manners, being productive and dedicated, showing up actually matters. So they are learning real life skills through what they're able to participate in their school. We walked through the halls and saw student success and high expectation. You could literally smell it in the air.
As we ventured to the Sand Hills region and Columbus County schools, Dr. Diane Meadows reminded us that we constantly need to understand the belief and the purpose of education. And they showed this to us in both literacy and digital learning and coding in ELA, and also in accountability and testing as we toured CTE programs at their early college. One of the most memorable quotes of this was by Dr. Cox, and she said, "How do we get to shift the mindset of our state so that work keys becomes just as important to our communities as the SAT and the ACT?" They've got 4 programs: masonry, metals, culinary arts, and broadcasting, that really exemplified that. Probably, I would say one of the most impactful was listening to, literally, his name is Fred Mason, the masonry teacher there, talk to about how the partnership between the local community college and the high school led by Jeremiah Johnson. We had the opportunity to speak with one student who was following in her 3 generations of footsteps of masonry, as her grandfather was the mason in their village in Mexico, and her father is now one here in the United States. She lays 570 bricks an hour. Just an incredible way to meet that. And lastly, again, the district and regional support, consolidated schools, and also utilizing the hybrid model to address human capital. We then journeyed to the Piedmont Triad region and Elkin City Schools. And I remember Dr. Myra Cox continuously saying, "It is a great day to be a bucking elk." And we saw this over and over again as their charted course of team focus and student and family centered, collaborative and intentional learning opportunities showed what an incredible opportunity the students and the families have of Elkin. We looked at human capital and incredible principal leadership and literacy and kindergarten class that was set up in response to COVID-19. Also the virtual academy and global education. And lastly, student support services that really looked at equitable opportunities as with at-risk outreach advisors, tutoring opportunities, family engagement, and a very robust communication system.
The bus is an ongoing theme here, but the Smart Bus at Mount Airy City Schools showed us that transportation advances can keep kids safe and bridge communication between schools and families. This district has been back in school all in since August 17th, and their adherence to the 3 W's, strong but new building leadership and engagement with students and parents, are a model for how schools can not only survive but thrive during adversity and grow in their ADP and in student achievement at every level. We looked at industry partnerships, Chinese immersion, the Blue Bear Cafe, and CTE pathways. In fact, on the next slide, please. Our Teacher of the Year from Mount Airy City Schools, Tanya Davis, and Principal Jason Dorsett, who was on that day named their District Principal of the Year, along with their community partner, Polly Long, and others, helped build the Blue Bear Cafe. The Blue Bear Cafe is a student-centered and student-operated coffee shop inside their school, and their students are building skills, confidence, and pride for what they do, as well as giving them lifelong skills for the workforce when they graduate from Mount Airy City Schools.
In the Southwest region, we visited Union County Schools, and we witnessed an unbelievable district-wide integration of arts, world languages, theater, and music. We looked at human capital and their industry partnership with Atrium Health, which provides opportunities in the health industry from all the way from the elementary school all the way up to the high school. We also witnessed dual language immersion in the science of readings in the elementary school at East Elementary, and then career and college readiness opportunities that included a great amount of academic rigor and opportunities ranging from the IB program, also a Chinese immersion program. And we ended the day with one of the first live performances that Mr. Darian Malone, the Union County Teacher of the Year, has done in over a year at Marvin Ridge High School.
In the Northwest region, we visited Catawba County Schools, where Superintendent Matt Stover said one of the things that will stick with me forever because it speaks to my heart as a teacher. He said, "I get emotional about standards. They reflect the purpose and the why for learning." You could see that reflected in every place, in every corner, in every school. If you'll go to the next slide, what you can see is down at the bottom 2, pictures are examples of things that we found in the hallways, standards, as well as how they were related to essential questions that were being broken down by the teacher and the student, and then reflected in the content, in the lessons, and in the things that the teachers were teaching that were meeting the needs of their students as they applied to the standards. And it was something that drove everything that they did in every corner of every building in every school. We also witnessed how Principal Iams from Mill Creek Middle School led their school district in social and emotional learning that really helped build up school safety in a way that encompasses the needs and health concerns for all of their students. She says, in a time when people are disconnected, the heart work is the hard work, and it is the most important. They engage students and teachers through a multiplicity of social and emotional strategies that make their schools safe, productive, and full of love and learning.
Pre-K is the beginning of school in Polk County. It's another grade level, and it changes the long-term student success here, says Superintendent Aaron Green of Polk County Schools. What we witnessed here were how these programs within each of these elementary schools grabbed the flavor of their community. They were masters at blending resources, whether it be North Carolina Pre-K, Title I, Head Start, EC, etc. And as we listen and learn from Teacher of the Year, who is a Pre-K teacher, Laura Jane Howard, this really came to life in Polk County schools. In the Western region, continuing, we went to Cherokee County Schools, where Superintendent Jenna Conley says our teachers are wired to care for our kids. And not only wired to care for their kids, but as we were introduced to the idea of the collaborative, which is a multiplier mindset initiative, we learned that this combines everyone's best interest, pulling together teacher leadership and allowing them to share out, to engage, to collaborate, and a collective mindset that we must find something, a place to flourish for our students, but also for our teachers. She said that our teachers had to learn to reteach, and our leaders had to learn how to re-lead. And this was greatly evident in Cherokee counties as they transcend the impact of COVID-19.
Finally, in the western part of the state, we visited Macon County Schools. Superintendent Chris Baldwin talked about how not just teachers, but leaders know all their kids. In Macon County, we know our kids, all of them, and they know them by name and they know their stories. What we saw was twofold. Two things I'd like to highlight here. Number one, we visited the Nantahala School, which is one of the 3 K-12 schools in North Carolina that is supported through its geographical isolation. So this is a school that's at the top of a mountain in the middle of the Nantahala forest, whereas if this school was consolidated into one of the other schools in their district, some of those students would have to travel over 2 hours on a bus to get to the next school. It is a community school, and the community loves it, and it loves its community. Also, while in Macon County, we were able to see how Macon County is already building out their model for summer learning opportunities. They are working with community groups to help with transportation, with staffing. One of the partnerships is with the Nantahala Learning Center so that they can make sure that their kids' needs are met this summer, not through just academics, but all through social emotional needs, mental health needs, and that their parents have an opportunity to really have a full day's work for their kids to have a place to go that is going to be enrichment focused and academic focused and really advance their kids as they move into the fall.
We also wanted to take the opportunity to thank the legislators who attended each one of these visits with us. So as you can see here, there's a list of our legislative partners within each one of the districts. Many of them spent the entire day at these districts. And so it just goes to speak of that partnership and that community that this initiative continues to try to lift up.
And finally, I'm excited to bring to you the idea about working in a teacher roundtable to the end of each of these visits. Now, this is not something that we will do at every district visit, but it's a piece of a project that Superintendent Truitt and I had in order to really begin to engage teacher voice as we build out a system of communication. So I worked with our North Carolina Teacher of the Year, Maureen Stover, and we hosted 10 different virtual teacher roundtables within the districts that we were visiting, but other teachers could, other district teachers of the year could Zoom in, or they could come into our Teams meeting and have a virtual roundtable where we talked about the different ways that teachers will be able to communicate and really close that feedback loop. So on the next slide, you'll see a list of things that we have as a team of teachers of over 100 teachers from across the state have come up with. We will be working on a monthly newsletter, which I previewed for you last month. We've had two episodes of that or two editions of that have come out. Our next one will come out later next week. Those monthly newsletters will spotlight teachers, classrooms, and schools. Teachers will be able to submit content to that. We'll look at hot topics with links to resources and information, as well as professional development links and other important information that affect teachers, students, and schools, and also give opportunities for teachers to really contribute their ideas and best practices so that they can see what's happening across the state. We've also partnered on a texting feature, which I also previewed for you last month, where we can gather real-time data and give feedback to teachers on a variety of different things. We have a really great response to that as well, and teachers really loved that they could get immediate feedback. We're also going to be hosting quarterly roundtables for teachers and ongoing engagement with different groups of teachers, like beginning teachers, which the superintendent and I will be doing next week at the Beginning Teacher of the Year event at NCAT. Teacher leaders and regional around the regions, also topic, content, and grade level specific roundtables. We'll continue to have district visits and connect with educators and bring board members and legislators and DPI leadership and support. And I'm excited to be able to continue this partnership and expand that partnership with my other fellow advisors, Tabari Wallace and Christy Van Auken, as we move into this next month. We're also working with our comms team to develop some short video content around promotions and highlights. And finally, I'm excited. It was not on this list because I submitted this before this was finalized, but I'm excited to announce to you that we're pulling together a teacher advisory group where we have a group of teachers from across the state who will be able to meet regularly, give feedback on ideas and questions that the board, the General Assembly, and people throughout DPI may have and want to get teacher feedback on. And we're really excited about the response that we've gotten from that. We're working with the regional case managers and the regional education facilitators to get all of those folks on board and begin that work in May. So
To end, this has been a soul-fulfilling opportunity to recapture the relationship between State Board and DPI that we have with our districts. This team, representative of the board and members and employees, including Dr. Oxendine and Jill, who made several visits, the department, the many deputies and advisors and staff, and the superintendent herself, who will also be partaking of these journeys in the next month. We'd really like to extend thanks to our RCMs who have been the conduit of this work and the captains of these visits, so thank you. We also would like to say a huge thank you to our districts for their leadership teams, their honesty, their courage, and their tenacity as they have dedicated to themselves as true lighthouse leaders across this state. Thank you for the opportunity to share today.
Well, thank you both, and I'll turn to our superintendent.
Well, first of all, I want to say thanks to both of you for your considerable passion for engaging with both students and educators, as well as other people in the community who you've clearly brought into the fold while you were conducting these visits. It's super clear from listening to you, looking at the pictures, that you are creating something that you saw a need for, which was to create this feedback loop that will allow for those in the field, those in the trenches, if you will, to be able to weigh in from far and near into what's happening in this room. And that is incredibly powerful. And we look forward to continual updates from you, the two of you, as well as Tabari and Christy, and to further engagement with the board. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Superintendent, and I'll add my thanks. I'm sure that my colleagues and I could spend the rest of the day talking with you. Okay, Ms. Kamnitz, I'll let you in. We are a little behind schedule, but
Really quick.
I'm sure what you have to say, we need to hear. Please lay it on us.
You know, you already took some of my time.
Touche.
So, well, just really fast. If you haven't been on one of these visits, fellow board members, I heartily recommend it. It is such an invigorating experience, and it just sort of, it helps you recommit, or it just energizes you for the work we do. Both of you on these visits, and Julie, particularly to your feedback loop that you're establishing with teachers. I personally, and I know some of my fellow board members have been hearing in our interactions with superintendents and other folks that they have concern about the mental health and the exhaustion that they're seeing in their teachers. And I wondered if you're hearing that as well in your interactions with folks across the state.
Yes, if I may, we are hearing that across the state. I want to sort of lay that in two buckets. Teachers are working hard and they are excited to have their students back in class. And they are, for those who haven't had them back in class. And the ones who have had them back in class are glad that they're there and able to continue that work with their students face to face. Teachers are working super hard and they are trying their hardest to learn as much as they can in an unprecedented time. And I know that that word unprecedented is well overused right now, but it continues to be. While I'm talking to you, I'm trying to pull up my one of the surveys that we just recently did that sort of one of the questions addresses this, and that is the question on one of the most recent surveys says, thinking about the end of 2020-2021 school year, summer opportunities, and the start of the 2021-22 school year, what is the one thing we should be most focused on? 60% of the respondents said that we should be most focused on educator fatigue and teacher support. The next closest category was learner recovery, support, and growth, both academic and non-academic, followed by SEL and mental health supports. So I think we can see that teachers are concerned about the mental health of their students, but also about their own mental health and their ability to keep going and do it at a way that they feel fulfilled and prepared to do. I think it's a real concern, but I also want to applaud the many teachers who have just carried the weight of a lot of what has happened in education over the last year.
I mean, we heard this morning that burden is also being carried by folks at DPI. I mean, it's been a very difficult year, but we need to be mindful. Yeah, of that. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
That's interesting.
Thank you again, Ms. Pittman and Mr. McKinney. We look forward to future reports. I now turn to our last committee of the day, the business operations. Oh, wait, do we have another update? Okay, I'll give you 15 minutes.
Oh, we will go quicker than that,
You
Chairman.
might earn a gold star.
My name is Jamie Falkenberry with DPI, Director of Government Affairs, with my colleague here, Freebird McKinney. I'm going to let Freebird breeze through this because he did such a good job on the last presentation. And if there's any other questions, I will be more than happy to chime in.
Good afternoon. We're going to present briefly on the legislative update for April 2021 from the Office of Government and Community Affairs. And literally since the presentation went out last week, if you look at the second page, there has been an increase of 225 new bills. So you can see the activity within the General Assembly right now. So that total now has moved to 1,212. There's also 218 new Senate bills, which increases that Senate bill number to 715. 32 more ed bills, and the calendar flex bills has stayed the same. So just to give you kind of a brief, again, looking at the numbers, that's what's transpired literally over the last week, but during the legislative session. As normal, my colleague Jamie and I have put links to each one of the bills here. So on this page, you will see bills that are now chaptered, including the House Bill 196, which is the COVID-19 response and relief, which is the funding bill. So if you click on any of those and have any further questions about that, but those have been chaptered for some time now. If you look at the next page, you will see bills that have passed their third reading. And I'll point to a couple specifically here that we did provide slides with further information and would be glad to answer any questions. Those would be House Bill 82, which is the summer learning choice for North Carolina families. That bill has now, as listed there, has been sent to the governor, and the 10 days will eclipse on Saturday. So just to give you some perspective on that bill. 159, a little down below there, education law changes. That is definitely a bill that we'll want to keep our eyes on, and we can answer any questions in regards to that. Next slide, please. Down at the very bottom, Senate Bill 387, which is the Excellent Public Schools Act of 2021, is also on the governor's desk, and that is what has been commonly referred to as the Read to Achieve Science of Reading bill. And then if you continue on, multiple other bills with links there in the presentation. So if you do see a bill that you would like for Mr. Falkenberry and I to provide any further information on, please feel free to reach out to us, and we'll do our best. Within that link, there typically is a bill summary. So if you see one that kind of jumps out at you, we're going to do our best to continue to keep you all up to date, particularly as the flurry of bills over the last week, as we learn more about what each one of these bills represents. If you now go to next slide, please. So this is the 387 Excellent Public Schools Act of 2021. So we tried to summarize that to our best ability for you. There is a direct link to the bill summary there as well. And again, this is the Read to Achieve Science of Reading bill. Slide, please. And then this is House Bill 82, the Summer Learning Choice for North Carolina Families. Again, a program summary, also a bill summary link there. Again, we'd be glad to answer any questions at the end of this presentation in regards to either of these. These are your typical links for the House and Senate joint appropriations, and also the governor's budget recommendations, which since our last meeting was made public. So did want to put that on there for you to take a look at. As was presented by Charlie Perouse at the Joint Appropriations Committee meeting. He did say that they were very excited to have so much uniformity between what was the budget that was approved by the board and DPI. So that was really good to see so many of the initiatives in the governor's budget there. And then the calendar for March. So links to specific meetings and those agendas that Mr. Falkenberry and our team attended. And then I am very lucky because my colleague and good friend Alexis Schaus will be presenting a much more in-depth presentation coming up in BizOff. So we're going to leave these next two slides to her, but there are links there and references to the ESSER bills and to what we're commonly referring to as ARP, the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021.
Great job.
Yes, very good. Thank you for that quick and effective update. Appreciate the good work you're doing. Thank you so much. We'll now turn to the Business Operations Committee led by Vice Chair Duncan. Duncan.
Thank you. Along with Todd Chastain, we lead the Business Operations Committee, and we have several items for consideration today. Our first item action on first read is the approval of contracts for over $500,000. I've not heard any questions or comments from any board members about any of those four contracts. If there are any, let me pause so we can deal with those now. not hearing any, I am going to call on one of those contracts. Dr. Mike Spano is here, as is Mike Ramsey. I think Mr. Ramsey's going to come in. One of the contracts is almost $1 million for cybersecurity assessment. It's part of the $10 million that was designated by the legislature from the funds that were in ESSER 2 that were designated as set-asides for the state educational agency to use. Those particular funds have been designated by the legislature to go to cybersecurity. And because that's been an important issue for the board, I thought I'd give Mr. Ramsey just 1 to 2 minutes to cover what we're doing here with this.
Thank you, Mr. Duncan. Good afternoon, Chair Davis, Superintendent Truitt, Lieutenant Governor Robinson, and then board members and guests. School connectivity does provide internet access and responsible for cybersecurity in K-12. To Ms. Pittman's comment about Knott's Island, real briefly, Knott's Island was the only school building in the state that did not have fiber-based internet access, and that's getting solved this year. That wireless in the classrooms, we've finally got fiber all the way to that island. It did have to come from Virginia, but we'll go further. So to this piece, we are all one team. To this piece for the cybersecurity assessment, in January of this year, we gave our school connectivity report to the General Assembly. And one of our recommendations was requesting $10 million over 2 years to establish some cybersecurity infrastructure. We now have in the bill, in the Senate Law 2021-3, they gave us $1 million to conduct assessments and $9 million to do the activities after that $1 million. It's our opinion that that is their response. The assessment that we're going to be doing is going to be all encompassing, but at a very quick high level, because there's a report that's due to the General Assembly on June 20th of 2021, which is Father's Day. Deep breath. All right, so due to the tight timeline to try and make all of this happen and knowing how the procurement process within the state works, I reached out to community colleges because they have just done nearly the same thing. And I asked them what process they went through. They utilized a state convenience contract. They evaluated several of the vendors that are on that contract, and we walked through their whole selection process. We're picking the same vendor that they used because it'll just be quicker, smoother, easier, defensible. This assessment, when it comes back, we're going to use that to determine how we're going to spend that $9 million. And we don't know yet if it's going to be a wide solution where we try to do something for everybody, or if we treat it as a pilot where say, okay, these 10 are the ones we're going to really do it right with, and we'll understand what all the total costs are. We all will be involved in when the assessment comes out, headed. So we've been able to we've issued a statement of work to Accenture. They have responded back, and I've provided you with with what that quote is, and we would like to move forward with alacrity.
Thank you. So one of the reasons I asked to highlight this is obviously cybersecurity has been important. And the second reason is there are a few legislative items in which it's called for very quick turnaround, and the procurement process doesn't allow for a typical bidding process to take place before the time of the contract needing to be in place and responsive information received. This is an example of that. So I think Mr. Ramsey has described well the precautions that were still taken to try to make sure we got a vendor who had the knowledge and ability to do what was necessary, and at the same time trying to meet the guidelines, and also got approval from DIT, which, as you all know, is a difficult process on occasion. So thank you and the others of your colleagues who assisted in facilitating the process. And so this will now go forward, and it's a very short timeline. We'll hear the report back this summer sometime. So thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Our next item is BizOp 2 School Nutrition Equipment Assistance Grants. This is a happy annual event when we get federal funding to help districts around the state to help replenish some of their equipment, which has certainly taken a lot of work this past year. And so Dr. Lynn Harvey's here to report on that. And Dr. Harvey, you also gave an excellent report for us the other day with respect to what's going on and making sure our children continue to be fed. We're short on time, but if you could give the board 1 or 2 paragraphs on that, I think people would like to hear the work that continues in that regard. And then we can, I think, pretty quickly go through the school nutrition equipment assistance grant at that point.
My pleasure to be here. And I hope that as you see me today, you'll see the face of every student in North Carolina who's thrilled to be back for face-to-face instruction. It's so good to be here today. So that's who I represent. But yes, I'm happy to continue to share that the school nutrition efforts to provide nutritious, appealing meals to our economically disadvantaged, largely children, but all children in the state continues. We're almost at 150 million since last year at this time. All that to the credit of those local school nutrition heroes, many of them first responders in any disaster, natural disaster or otherwise, who continue to go forward day after day, weekends, holidays, to make sure that our students are adequately nourished. We're also very pleased to be in partnership with our colleagues at DHHS to issue pandemic electronic benefits transfer, pandemic T, to our households. We know that for many children in North Carolina, primary source of food and nutrition are the meals provided at school. For those who have been in 100% virtual learning and those who've been in a hybrid environment, households have really suffered economically at not being able to provide food for their children. We see that reflected in the percent of food insecurity in our state pre-pandemic, which was at about 11.5%. Fast forward into July last year, we were up to 25% food insecurity in our state. Many of these food insecure households, of course, have small children. So PEBT is providing a cash benefit on T card to help those families with the food assistance they need. And I'm happy to tell you that PEBT will continue through the summer months. We're not certain what the summer is going to look like for our learning environment, but we know that for our children who don't have access to those meals at school, there will be PEBT support, and for those who will be returning to school, school meals will continue to be available. And I must say, I must give credit to our federal partner, the U.S. Department of Agriculture. The flexibilities they've given us, we're now operating under waiver number 85. The flexibilities they've provided have been incredible. And we look to see this as a new normal for what school meals will look like, as we recognize we're going to need to expand those programs, many of which were authorized in the 40s, to see what that new education environment looks like. So something good has come from this. In many circumstances, it's been difficult. It continues to be. But as we look forward to the opportunities of how we can better meet the needs of families and children and communities, I think we're certainly heading in the right direction. It's a privilege to be a part of that. Thank you for your support. Flexibilities come to life. So as Mr. Duncan said, it's always nice to come to bring good news about the equipment assistance grants. The department received about $905,000 this year for the purpose of subgrants to school food authorities to purchase commercial food equipment for the service of and preparation of meals, nutritious meals, I might add, to our students. The guidance for issuing these sub-awards is very clearly established by our colleagues at USDA. We go through a discretionary grant process, the policy prescribed by the board. Request for applications was issued. All applications were received in the time that was allotted. The applications essentially ask the districts to provide basic information, school enrollment, percentage of students who are eligible for free or reduced price meals at school, student participation in meals. We're also asked to provide a specification for the equipment and a relationship with the district that's been pre-established by a qualified vendor to provide that. Districts simply have to help us determine their capacity to use the equipment based upon 5 criteria: food safety and quality, energy efficiency, increasing student participation, expanding nutrition education or implementing higher nutrition standards. And one of our favorites is to allow for the adoption of innovative practices in the school nutrition environment, specifically the inclusion of more locally grown fresh agricultural products. Now, we did have the discretion this year to add one more criteria, and we chose to add the inclusion of equipment that would help districts address disasters, whether they're natural disasters, we know we're prone to some of those, or a pandemic. So there was an opportunity to request those kinds of items as well. We're happy to share with you in your documentation today that we received 29 applications from 29 school food authorities representing 22 traditional public school districts and 7 charter schools. Our charter schools are really expanding in their capacity to submit applications for this recognition. Based upon your approval of these subgrantees, we will notify them and transfer the funds through the allotment process. Information about reporting against these grants will be provided to them at that time, as well as the reminder that these funds must be expended by September 17th. We'll then make our final report to USDA once we have confirmation that all equipment has been successfully installed and is being used. So the good news, we seldom have this kind of good news. All applicants receive their requests. How often do you have the opportunity in a grant process to say that everyone had their wishes to come true? Now, the not so good news is that perhaps that had to do with the limited number of applications. We did not receive applications from some of our education districts, and based on conversations with Mr. Duncan, strategy to work with those districts to help them complete the application, because I'm also happy to tell you that another round of equipment assistance grants will be forthcoming. We're going to work on one-to-one work sessions or group work sessions that might help them complete that application. Now, it probably will be easy for us to understand that those districts that said they didn't submit simply said to us, we were so busy in the pandemic response that we just didn't have time to complete even the simple application. So a tribute again to their hard work. We hope to receive approval from USDA that we can allow those districts that have not been able to submit applications over the last 2 rounds to have some preferential scoring as we go forward, so they have the opportunity to participate in the grant as well. So I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
You open the floor for questions. Ms. White.
Thank you for the incredible work you're doing, an opportunity to engage with you in the hallway, but a passion to eliminate food insecurity is near and dear to my heart, because students who are hungry cannot focus in the classroom. So on behalf of all of the students across the state, thank you.
And I must extend that to the amazing team of professionals inside this agency. Our consultants, our specialists work diligently to provide that support. You may not be aware that we have regionally based consultants who are, all of whom are within 2 hours of the districts they serve. So it's been a great opportunity for them to grow, support, serve as well. Our great to serve with you. Thank you.
If I might follow with a question.
Certainly.
In the one of the pre-committee meetings that we had in preparation for this meeting, it came to my attention that there was a reluctance from parents receiving funds through the PEBT cards to return their students to in-person instruction, because upon returning the student to in-person instruction, the deposit of funds in that account would cease. The April 1st deadline and decisions for this academic year have been made. What can we do to prevent parents from making that same decision to return students to in-person instruction in the fall, should the federal funding continue? In my opinion, students need to be back in the classroom in front of an educator, and I wouldn't want those extra funds to be the deterrent for the parental decision at the home. Any thoughts on that?
We share your concern. In fact, superintendents reached out to us early on and did follow up with our colleagues at USDA to ask if there was anything we could include in the North Carolina state plan that would create an incentive for parents to return their students to the classroom. And the response was, since this is a food assistance program, there was clearly reluctance on the part of USDA to limit households' access to those PEBT funds. I think that perhaps it's going to be incumbent upon us to do 2 things. Reach out to our congressional delegation to let them know we are concerned about this, and let them perhaps help drive incentive that could inspire parents to return their children to the classroom without penalizing the food assistance that they desperately need. Number 2, I think we're going to have to continue to help parents and communities understand the joy that comes from being in this face-to-face environment and all that can happen to children as they are re-engaging in their classrooms. But we certainly share your concerns, and I'm happy to work to explore opportunities. Food insecurity is very real in our state, and I think we are all empathetic to households who literally are struggling to keep food on the table. Sadly, too many parents are seeing this as an opportunity to continue to keep that food. So working with our communities as well to address food insecurity across the state will be important. We are the eighth leading state in child food insecurity, and a sobering statistic. Thank you.
Are there any other questions for Dr. Harvey? If
This
not,
is
thank you. Oh, there is. Hold on.
really quick. I may have missed it. What was the implication about the food assistance if parents don't return? I just didn't hear that. If you could repeat that, that'd be great.
Certainly. Children who are 100% in the virtual environment are eligible to receive the maximum PEBT rate, which is roughly $115 per month in this state. So when children return to the hybrid environment or full-time, their benefits are diminished by the number of days they're attending school face-to-face.
Sure. Thank you for that. And the implication was as a way to incentivize them by lowering that amount or cutting that amount off. I'm just wanting to make sure I got clarity on that.
Well, we certainly don't want to cut that amount off by any means to any household because the food needs are great. But I think looking at some means of incentivizing parents to return their children to the classroom, recognizing that as they do continue to the classroom, their food needs will be met by having breakfast, lunch, and snack during the school day. But it is a challenge that we face as parents are having to make the decision about providing food for the table with the amount of income that comes from the PEBT benefit. Interestingly, I've reached out as well to other states to determine if this is a concern, such that we might see a nationwide out to do something that doesn't take food or cash resources from households at a time that they are most cash strapped, while creating an incentive to return students to the classroom.
I 100% agree. I appreciate you for clarifying. I would just like to put on the record that there is a difference in distinction between an incentive and a disincentive. And over the past couple of meetings, I've heard a couple of implications of penalizing students by holding them back and potentially not promoting them due to not returning devices, and the mere notion of diminishing the monies for food insecure parents who are already struggling. I just want us to remember that, you know, these are the very communities who, by every other educational metric, are not performing well. And so in the spirit of equity and whole child, true incentives that don't disincentivize or sanction students are the ones we want to focus on. So thank you for that.
All right. Any other questions or comments? All right, Dr. Harvey, thank you very much for both reports. I know one of them was on short notice, but I think was very valuable to everyone. So thank you for the work that you do, and please thank your colleagues for all the work they're doing. All right, that brings us into BizOp 3, and Dr. Latricia Townsend, I believe, will be giving us a quick report on what the application is that we must approve for ESSER 3 funding requests by the districts.
Yes, thank you, Vice Chair Duncan. As you know, the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARP, provided $3.6 billion to North Carolina in the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund. Public school units that receive Title I Part A funds are eligible to receive ESSER 3 funds and will receive a share that is proportionate to their Title I share. The allotment policy will be presented in the next agenda item by my colleague, Ms. Alexis Schaus. Public school units must apply for their share of the fund source using an application, which is what you have in your materials. The application is in its paper form, but it will actually be deployed in the Comprehensive Continuous Improvement Plan, or CCIP, which is our web-based planning and grants management tool. The application, as you see, has the following sections: a needs assessment, a data analysis portion, a section in which PSUs are able to share how they will address learning loss, The next section allows PSUs to share how they will use funds in addition to just learning loss. And then lastly, assurances. I would like to say something about the learning loss portion. PSUs are required to spend at least 20% of their funds on addressing learning loss. And so there is a portion in the application where they are able to share just a general overview of how they will address learning loss. They're required to spend 20%. However, if they so chose, they could spend more in this area. And then lastly, I'd like to point out within the assurances section, a requirement of ARP is that schools create a safe return to in-person instruction plan. That plan must undergo a 30-day comment period and then be posted on their website, and they are expected to follow that plan. We plan to open the application in CCIP on April 12th. And we expect to receive applications back by May 7th so that we are able to process them in this fiscal year. I welcome any questions.
Yeah, thank you. One thing, and I think you really did clarify it in your remarks, but just to be clear, I think board members have received at least one concern from a superintendent about the timing or how quickly the funding can be received. Can you just clarify? I think you're probably aware of the request about that. Can you clarify, just make it very clear for superintendents, because this is very important for them in terms of timing?
Yes, sir, happy to. So we are really up against up against a really tight timeline. We are asking for applications to come in by May 7th so that we have an opportunity to be able to hold consultations. At times, applications are sent back for additional information. And so that would enable us to finalize those applications and process them this year. The money does not go away if the application does not come in on May 7th. It's just that it would perhaps be a case where that application would be processed and their flow of funds would not happen until the next fiscal year. So that means that they would get their funds July, August timeframe. And so we are really trying to make sure that those funds are available so that if they want to use them for summer activities or have bunnies in place to be able to move into the fall, that they have access to those as soon as possible.
Thank you. It's very helpful clarification. It's the fiscal year timing that's important. So May 7th becomes important. And also,
yes, sir. So you'll have budget. So DPI will have its budget closeout procedures as well as the school district working on having their fiscal year closeout procedures.
Yes, thank you. Excellent explanation. Any other questions or comments for Dr. Townsend? All right, not hearing any. We now are going to move on to the elementary and secondary school K-12 emergency relief 1, 2, and 3 allotment policies. So it's been helpful in the past to the board to get a reminder of where the various allotments have come from these various funds and what's paid out and what may be left and what the policies are that apply to them. And Alexis Schaus has given us some excellent reports in the past to help clarify that and is here to do that for us again today. So
thank you, sir. Yeah, the recommendation in BizOp 4 is to approve some changes to ESSA 1 and also to approve new policies related to ESSA 2 and ESSA 3, not just the state aid, but also in the leadership category. You have in your materials the full COVID allotment policy manual with all the detail of those changes that are being recommended. But I do recognize that although some of us live and breathe these policies and the different buckets of funding, you have many other things to occupy your time. So I thought that it would be best to go back just to do a quick refresher as to what the status is of these funds, and then that will put in perspective the requests that are being put before you today. So starting with the state funds, This time last year, Governor Cooper redirected $50 million for emergency funds to the public school units for their immediate needs. The General Assembly provided the authority for us to use up to $12 million of transportation funds to support the school nutrition transportation. We received and allocated out $2 million of that 12 million. The remaining were used for the regular transportation allotment, and then 3.9 million to pay for that copay. But as Dr. Harvey stated, we have, with all the federal accommodations, those funds have actually not been used at this time, but it does look like a familiar number for you as it is in your expansion items so that we can continue to fund that copay. The remaining of the funds are federal funds, and I will give credit to my co-workers over at NC Pro for this graph. Not generally the most visual person, so I needed all the help I could get. And what this graph does is it shows the three federal acts and the different pots of money that K-12 schools received through that. So on the left-hand side, we had the CARE 2020, and we received ESSA funds, which are the education emergency funds. We received GEAR funds through the governor's office, and then federal state aid. And the federal state aid are funds that come straight from the federal government to the North Carolina General Assembly, and then they appropriated out to education, to health and human services, wherever they deem the state's needs are. Back in December, we had the Consolidated Appropriations Act, or known as CRISA, and we received more ESSA funds, as well as GEAR funds. But in this case, the governor's money was for non-public schools. But as you recall, you passed the application process for these non-public schools, and we are by federal law required to administer that program. And then finally, just last month, the AAR Act, where we received additional ESSA funds, and the state received federal state aid. And looking at it in a different kind of format, as we go through it, you'll see the CARES Act with that CRF, which is the state aid. Those are the coronavirus relief funds. Out of that $3.6 billion the state received, the General Assembly appropriated $316 million. And then the ESSA 1 in the CARES Act, in ESSA 2 in CRISA, ESSA 3 in ARP, and then that GEAR funds in the CARES Act that came to that 60 million of that 95.6 million came to K-12. When we're looking at the coronavirus relief funds, those were the funds that were appropriated from the General Assembly, the 316 million. These originally expired in December 30th, 2020. In the 13th hour, the federal government extended those funds for another year. Public school units have expended, as of the end of February, 90% of those funds. So they have almost been exhausted. When you're looking at the different pots of money that were appropriated, these are, and they should look all familiar to you. We went through all the policies. We worked together on those to get those approved. All the funds are allotted. There was a window of time where public school units were allowed to transfer funds between those allocations to meet their needs. That window has closed, but as I stated, 90% of the funds have been expended. The GEAR money, as that 95.6 million, 60 million was provided to K-12, the others to IHEs and the community colleges. They were provided to us from the governor in two pots, $40 million for the health positions. Those are the nurses, psychologists, social workers, and counselors. We have actually approved about 160 applications. We being up in the federal programs area, they do have to apply for these funds like they do for all federal grants, and 41 million has been allotted. The applications have come in a little slower than the other applications, but the deadline set by the federal programs area was March 31st. So we are waiting for those final application approvals and we will allocate them out. So now we come to the ESSA funds. This is the big amounts of funds, and we separate those out into the 90% of the public school units. That's the piece that the federal government says a minimum of 90% has to go out to the public school units in the formula that they determine. And then the remaining 10% we refer to as the state reserve. So looking at the 90% first, ESSA 1, we had $356 million was their 90% share. 36% of that has been expended as of the end of February. These funds have a very broad use. All the ESSA funds have a similar allowable use. And we have pretty much all of our public school units that were eligible for the funds have been approved and allotted for those funds. The ESSA 2, the board approved the application and the allotment policy just recently. And those applications were opened up by the federal programs area on April 1, and they are currently receiving and reviewing those applications. And then we will be able to allot those funds. They have been officially appropriated by the General Assembly. So we have that authority to distribute those funds out. And then finally, ESSA 3, you will see here that there is an asterisk by it. I did designate items that are being brought to you for approval for a change or a new policy. I do have that asterisk. This is a new policy. It is related to the ARP ESSA portion. The 90% is close to $3.2 billion. The expiration of that is 2024. The policy, which you do have the full policy in your materials, but the policy is very similar to ESSA 1 and ESSA 2 with the following differences. First of all, ESSA 3 requires a 20% allocation or 20% expenditures by the public school units to address learning loss. So that is different than the other two ESSAs. As I stated, these funds do expire in 2024, which is a year later than ESSA 2 and 2 years later than ESSA 1. The public school units who receive these funds, they must develop and make publicly available on their website within 30 days of receiving the funds, a plan for the safe return to in-person instruction and continuity of services. And then there is a new requirement to the public school units that if they are a public school unit with more than 1,000 students, they are required to maintain equity for high poverty schools. This is a new term, and we are waiting for guidance from the from the federal government to provide us a little bit more detail on some of the definitions here. But in short, what it requires is that a public school unit is not permitted to decrease their combined state and local funds per student more than they do, in their high poverty schools, more than a reduction for all their schools. In addition, they cannot reduce their full-time equivalent staff on a per pupil basis in those high poverty schools more than the schools as a whole. There is also a state level maintenance of equity, but this would not affect this policy. We are, once we get that guidance, we will be able to provide more details to the public school units and technical assistance on the calculations on that, specifically address defining those high poverty schools. So those are that is the kind of the big policy for ESSA 3 on the 90%. And then we'll move on to those 10% state reserve pieces. These also, there's 10% also includes any administration money. So for ESSA1, our 10% back in July, this board approved the use of that 10% reserve, the $38.6 million. And on the left-hand side there, you will see the 5 categories of allocations that went out to the public school units. And then on the right-hand side is kind of the DPI administration money, as well as that $6.6 million, which is some contracts, but predominantly it's the district and school transformation initiative. You'll see the asterisks there, designating that we are recommending a modification to these policies. The federal law requires that we commit funds within 1 year of receipt of the funds from the federal government, and that timeline will be May 11th. We have allocated out all the funds, and the school districts have been provided the opportunity to apply for the funds, receive technical assistance, and we do have small amounts of residual amounts in some of the allocations. And so in order for those funds not to revert back to the federal government, we are requesting that if the funds are not committed as of April 15th, that we be permitted to transfer those funds and allocate them in with the 90% bucket. The total amount between those 6 allocations is in the proximity of about $1 million, $1.1 million. So it's not a huge amount, but we don't want to revert that back to the federal government.
And just to highlight, we will be voting on this item to make that change in policy.
That's correct. It will be all 6 of those. We have put a clause at the end, a special provision on all 6 of those grants stating that if they are not committed as of April 15th, then we are authorized to reassign them. For the ESSA2, this is related to the recent passage of House Bill 196 that stipulated the majority of the use of that $160 million. Within that, there is I provided the detail of that of the House Bill 196, and this first slide is really just provided for information purposes. There is no policies associated with it, as they are all items that are held kind of managed at the DPI level. There are 3 items that we are, the House Bill 196 states that we will transfer out of the Department of Public Instruction, although we will still have to, we will still be responsible for the monitoring of those funds. And that is the digital library project at the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources, as well as the Wildlife Resource Commission for the North Carolina School Go Outside program. We also have $1 million that will be transferred to UNCGA for the new teacher support. UNCGA actually received $1 million also back last year for this same program through CRF funds. So that did not come through DPI, but these funds, being part of ESSA, will come to us, and then we will transfer out to UNCGA and then be responsible for that monitoring and reporting. $500,000 for the residential schools. And then the largest items here are the Voyager, the Science of Reading contract for the $12 million, as well as that $10 million for cybersecurity, which Mr. Ramsey just addressed. And that $1 million contract is within that $10 million stipulated there. The next slide will list the items that, again, you'll see that asterisk. We have developed policies because these items are going to be allotted out to the public school systems per House Bill 196. The first item is a kind of companion to the 90%. We saw this in ESSA1, if you recall. We had the formula and distribution requirement is that these funds are distributed based on the proportion of Title I received. For school districts or public school units that are either not eligible for Title I or they've waived their right to receive Title I, or they just receive a very small amount. An additional amount was provided to give them a minimum. For ESSA 1, it was $45 per student. For ESSA 2, the legislation states $180 per student, is kind of in proportion of the increase between ESSA 1 and ESSA 2. Although every public school unit is eligible for these funds, the only ones that qualify are are charter schools. I think the least amount that a school district receives per student is in the $330 range. I believe we have a couple of lab schools that are in the $230 range. So the recipients of this PRC will be PRC 172, will be charter schools. And the use of the funds we have stipulated are the same as for that 90% program. The second item is it's $10 million for contracted instructional support that are stipulated as school counselors, school nurses, school psychologists, and social workers. The language is almost identical to what the General Assembly appropriated back through CRF back last year. We had $20 million in CRF money in contracted instructional support. This is $10 million. But this will be federal funds. So all these funds have to comply with federal requirements, including having to apply for the funds and then with an approved budget before you can receive the funds. And then finally, ELLIS, which is the nonprofit grants for the $15 million. Again, we have seen these grants before. We had $5 million in CRF, and the language is the same for this grant. The other items below here are for school nutrition, and then there are some grants written in both. This is also in the legislation, grants for supporting in-person, and actually a portion of that is for virtual instruction addressing learning loss. Those will come to you at a future date. They are not ready. And then there is an undesignated portion. It actually is $15 million. That $500,000 was the Duke contract. That will be determined as we go through this process. And then the final item is just an information item, but kind of ties in with the state superintendent's report. This is the ESSA 3 10% state reserve, which is $360 million. In the federal legislation, it does stipulate that those percentages do have to be used on to address learning loss, summer enrichment, after-school programs, and then 2.5% is kind of an open item for state-level initiatives. The missing 0.5% is the maximum that can be used for administrative purposes. That is the end of the presentation. We do have a lot of resources on the Financial and Business Services website, including the full allotment policy manual, a summary of all the detail of all these items and their status. And we are working on posting out there an expenditure allotment report that people will be able to go to see not only how much has been spent, but also how each public school unit is expending these funds.
Thank you for an excellent report. As always, extremely informative with respect to the funds, which is a complicated situation, but one which you have made very straightforward for everyone to understand. Are there board members who have questions or comments about these various funding sources?
I do have a quick question.
Please,
Thank you, Mr.
Dr.
Becker.
Eisenman.
Yes, it's always interesting to hear your presentations about the money side of public education. You mentioned something about the equity provisions and they're forthcoming. You expect that to be the case? Or they?
So the maintenance of equity, it is in the legislation. and it is stipulated. What we're waiting on before we kind of go out to the school districts and provide them that technical assistance is guidance from the federal government to kind of fill in some of those definitions that we're not confident. We don't have all the information at this point. Yes.
I'll be interested in learning more about that. I think you mentioned something about FTEs might be adjusted or can't be lowered in the high poverty schools. Is that correct?
Yeah, they cannot be lowered more than the amount that all the school districts are being lowered. So they can't be disproportionately lowered.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? I'm going to have a few if we could run through them quickly. One thing I noted, Georgia gets 4.25 million under the ESSER 3, and North Carolina gets 3.6 million. They have relatively the same population. Other people might notice that. Can you give an explanation for people why there would be a difference?
Sure. The Title I is based on census data. So it is based on the poverty of students of school-age students. So based on that, without looking at it, kind of in detail, I would assume that their poverty data is higher than North Carolina's.
With respect to the ESSER 2 funds, really the first question that I have, and I have several, with the HB 196 distributing what would have been the 10% reserve that in the bill is set out to the state educational agency. But it's been otherwise delegated by the legislature. It has, for example, 500,000 to the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources. Are we responsible for receiving those funds and then paying them to another department of the state that's not education?
That's correct. So we receive the grant notification, and then we would be responsible for transferring those funds with an accompanying MOU. And then we'd be responsible for ensuring that those funds were used appropriately and in accordance with the federal guidelines and the reporting of that.
Which means we'll have to use our funding for resources that are going to, in that case, the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources, as opposed to the education of our children.
We would be responsible for that administration of it. That is what the Department of Education would expect from us.
Same would be true with, does the Department of Education allow funds to be distributed to non-educational boards? Because the assignment of the funding is to the state educational agency, not to, for example, the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources or the Wildlife Resource Commission.
Well, we are the state education agency, and they would be kind of a sub-recipient of that. So I believe it would be similar to a contract, but I think that's probably outside of my legal expertise on that.
So then other than with respect to the UNCGA, the new teacher support, Wildlife Resource Commission, those are funds that we are being directed to send to other departments of the state. Are we again responsible for the auditing responsibility, the oversight of those funds?
We are.
And whatever costs are associated with that?
Correct.
Mr. Vice Chair, may I?
Yes.
So I'm not sure what the intent of transferring that money, of having the SEA transfer that money to those two particular divisions would be, other than that there is a specific education resource listed under the Wildlife Commission for an education program. But I did have the opportunity to meet with Secretary Wilson, who let me know that there are several education programs that they are running in conjunction with Title I schools that are education related. So perhaps we can make sure that the funds that we are transferring is being used for these education programs.
Are any of those funds on the department's list of priority projects most in need in the middle?
They have, I would say that they classify as, some of them are specific to rural outreach, outdoor education. There are there are some, there's a program called NC Cultural Kids that is part of a YouTube channel. There is a hotspots, $84,000 they spent on hotspots for connectivity in rural areas. And then there are several projects with historical sites. The cultural affairs, the Department of Natural and Cultural.
That been in conjunction with the department, because DPI spent millions of dollars on hotspots in order to connect with our students.
I think it was wholly separate.
Okay, and did it have any connection to our students when they did it?
It was for public school units, for students who attend public schools. But I think there were some historic sites, some projects with the aquariums that were specific to Title I schools, some field trips, and things like that.
With respect, again, to the ESSER II funds, is there a similar provision in place for those funds that are not expended in the way they are allocated, that they would be monitored carefully so that there would not be a reversion of funds? And specifically, that is the 10% that was allotted separately to the SEA.
Yes, so
So far with ESSER,
related to the allotment policies,
yes,
we did put a provision at the end of that, so we wouldn't have to change it later, that does state that I believe we put a November 15th date, if they have not been committed at that time, that we would reallocate those funds into that 90% of the ESSER II, similar to what you may approve with that ESSER I.
is the date with respect to the holdback, specifically referring to HB 196 allocations of ESSER II funds. We haven't approved yet. I mean, I think you're asking us to approve this as part of what you're asking today. Is that right?
I am requesting the allotment policies not related to the DPI. Not related to the DPI administered portions.
The $8 million roughly for that, correct?
The
DPI administrative holdback's roughly $8 million.
That's the administration portion.
Yes. This is the remainder is covered by HB 196, correct?
Not in its entirety. There is also $15 million that is undesignated within House Bill 196. There is $15 million that is undesignated.
So my question is really for you, Superintendent Truitt.
Okay.
The 14.5 million that remains undesignated, in addition to plans for whatever money may not be expended under the designations that are set out here. Do we have a proposal and priorities that we can set forth for approval by the board so that we can take advantage of those important funds? I don't expect you to say, yes, we have one right this.
Yeah. So the way that 14.5 million was explained to me is that it was money for the state boards. I was under the impression that it was already encumbered. Is that not the case?
I'm not aware of undesignated being encumbered, so maybe we should get clarification.
Okay.
That would be the best thing. It would maybe it's held in reserve in some unencumbered way. I don't think it's encumbered anything specific to this point.
So there are no, for example, something like there are no programs that or grants that the board has given out that this money's already been, like NC Ed Core or something like that. Okay.
No.
Then we will definitely put together a plan.
All right. So I think on behalf of the board, it would be helpful to have a plan so we then can consider how to make best use of this.
Yes, sir.
That funding that's available. And then have a plan that whatever would revert, it comes, we would know, we'd set a deadline in time that, again, the department could have enough time to since we're looking ahead to 2023 on these funds, that the department would have time to make the very best use of these limited resources. That
Yes, and I should also state like the costing of some, like, so for instance, that the charter school, the supplemental funding, that was the $180 minimum, that actually will not come to $10 million. It will be less, and we will have an addition. So there will be some items that will not.
And that's exactly what I'm referring to, where we're not going to expend it all, but we certainly don't want to revert it. We want to use it in the best instances for our children and in ways that comport, obviously, with the intention of the act. So a couple more questions on this. I realize we haven't gone through the process of preparing for the Ellis grants, the school nutrition grants, and the grant supporting in-person instruction addressing learning loss. That's what can best be described at this point as a work in progress. But just a request that I think the board in general has commented before. Can we take great care to make sure that those grants are distributed in a highly equitable manner, that the places of greatest need are considered, and not just those that are capable of putting together great grant proposals. And some of our places of greatest need don't have the resources to put together that grant proposal.
Absolutely.
Can I just add, Vice Chair Davis, as we
Please.
just heard from Dr. Harvey and the school nutrition equipment, that some of them just said they didn't have the personnel or the ability
That's
to
right.
get the grants in. So we don't, anything we can do to help that.
Yes.
So last item on LS3 of the federal legislation stipulated again to the SEA, the 10% holdback, the half, which the holdback was distributed in a different way than we have in the past. The 10% has been allocated with a little more specificity. Are we in the process of preparing a plan of the departments in conjunction with the board priorities for use of these funds and how we can make the very best use of them, and also recognizing that the funds are good until 2024, which make them much, every year of further extension makes them more valuable? Is that something that we will work on to have something presented to the board before long?
Yes, so we saw a preview of that with Dr. Marr's presentation, and then we will have more specificity as time goes on. But we certainly, I think what he indicated this morning is that the specific plan for so there's the work of supporting the districts in the ways that you're both mentioning, and helping them figure out what their students need and what's possible with the resources they've been given. Then there's also the best way to spend this holdback money. Should we be able to decide how to spend that money, which is still not a given yet.
Well, that's what happened with the first one. The second one,
So
I'm not sure we were consulted. Certainly as a board, I don't believe we were
Right.
consulted about. With respect to this, I don't want there to be a suggestion. After I heard Dr. Marr also say that today, and I thought I heard him say maybe something in the fall. And I'm going to respectfully suggest that we as a board have priorities in line to share with the legislature before we have a decision made without the board or the department being consulted.
That's correct. Yes.
We have educational experts. We're blessed to have many educational experts here in the department, and I think we do want to very much value the thoughts that they bring and you bring, of course, as their leader to the table, so that we can make the very best use of the funding, or at least make our best recommendations for how that funding will be used as you perceive the situation. These are, for some of our students, these are generational changing funds. Some of our students have had impacted school years for 4 or 5 years in a row. And that becomes a generation, or at least a mini generation. So responsibility is awesome here. Try to make sure that we address the generational needs of these children. And I have a tremendous amount of confidence in the educators and your leadership in helping us make recommendations to do the very best. And I'm hoping that we will act in a way that assists in being very much a part of the process for that, to take advantage of the skills and expertise that you hold.
Absolutely.
So I'm sorry for taking so much time. Those were all the questions that I had.
If I might just state one thing, which I did not state, but it kind of came up with Dr. Townsend presentation, is that in ESSA 3, for the 90%, not the 10% that we were just talking about, but for the 90%, the federal legislation does state that we are to allocate those funds out within 60 days of receipt of the funds. I'm not sure if that came through clearly, but we do need kind of that authorization from the General Assembly or GovOps in order to do that.
So maybe, Ms. Schaus, the best thing to do, the things out of this item that we will be voting on today or approving, if you could list those out, I think that'd be very beneficial.
I'm just it's highlighting the ones.
The things that we ultimately would be approving and thereby voting on
Certainly.
based on the presentation.
Certainly. So it will be the 90% ESSA 3 grant or allocation, which is the $3.2 billion that go out to the public school units. In addition, it will be 3 items for ESSA 2 state leadership, which are stipulated in House Bill 196. And the policies really reflect what that legislation states. And then finally, it is addressing the state leadership items in ESSA 1 that are permitting us to transfer out any uncommitted funds prior to that year cutoff and put that into or distribute it out by formula in the ESSA 1 90% program report code.
Can we amend that requested vote, or on behalf of the committee, I would ask if that we would also ask for recommendations from the department on how to use the remaining ESSER 2 funds that are not already accounted for, or that will be not used in the designated categories. Then further recommendations from the department on the ESSER 3 pullback funds as part of passing this motion. I don't know if I need a second to do that or not, but the committee does that.
From a committee, a second's not required.
I did. That's extremely helpful. Thank you so much. And again, I'm sorry for taking time, but I really appreciate how clear and wonderful your reports are on these complex issues. Any other questions or comments from Ms. Schaus? Yes. Before you sit down, or after you've already sat down, actually, that's perfect. You can sit down. We want to congratulate you for being the new Chief Financial Officer. At least we did it after your report, so you didn't have to be red-faced during your report.
Well deserved.
Well deserved.
Mhm.
All right, Biz Op 5 is the North Carolina Education Core Education Fund grant request. And we have Mike Ward and Dr. Mike Ward, and John Paul Smith here, who will report upon the incorporation of the North Carolina Emergency Fund, and I may not have the title right, that we established some time ago with respect to the hurricanes, and is now developed into a 501c3 that funds will be utilized for, and that will be the subject of the request. And then there's also a matter of naming 2 members from the board to the advisory committee, two people from the board to the advisory committee. So, Dr. Ward, do I start with you?
Sure, that's great. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Chair Davis, Superintendent Truitt, Lieutenant Governor Robinson, Treasurer Falwell, board members and advisors. We're really appreciative of this opportunity to address the work of the North Carolina Education Corps. As we've discussed before, the North Carolina Education Corps had a successful launch in January. Let's move to the next slide, please. We had a successful launch in January. There are now over 200 Corps members serving in 20 North Carolina school districts, and we've made a lot of progress on other fronts. In March, the North Carolina Education Corps incorporated as a nonprofit. We officially appointed our executive director, and we adopted the goal of the state board as we set our first targets for the growth of Education Corps. And the next few slides will further address these issues. First of all, our board of directors for the nonprofit, I have the good fortune to chair the board. Carolyn Farmer is secretary to the board, and Susan Jameson is serving as the board treasurer. Craig Horn, Tony Jackson, Maria Rosa Rangel, and Catherine Truitt fill out our board of directors for the nonprofit. These individuals are also members of our larger board of advisors. That's a 20-member board of advisors, and I'm very pleased to tell you that Governor Jim Hunt and Governor Jim Martin have agreed to serve as the honorary co-chairs to this larger board of advisors for Education Corps. We're mindful of the origins of the North Carolina Education Corps with the state board and the governor's office. And we're mindful of our desire to work in close concert with the board's original vision for the North Carolina Education Corps. And so with that in mind, Mr. Vice Chair, thank you for the reference to the board appointing liaisons to the Board of Advisors. Next slide, please. We also celebrate the selection of John Paul Smith as Executive Director. That had not to come as a surprise. John Paul has provided outstanding leadership for the last 6 months in working with leaders from the State Board, DPI, and the Office of the Governor and the participating districts to transform what was a dream into an operational program of service to students and educators and communities. Next slide, please. The board early on articulated a target of deploying at least 1,000 Corps members, and we're looking to be there in 2 years. It's going to take a lot of effort. We're willing to do that work. It's also going to take resources, and we're willing to seek those resources. We've raised significant funds from foundations to date, and those funds have been directed to the State Board's North Carolina Education Fund. Vice Chair Duncan mentioned the previous service we received from that fund in operating FAST NC. Today, we seek funds from the North Carolina Education Fund to continue the good work of the North Carolina Education Corps. I'm going to turn it over to John Paul to speak to the particulars of the funding request.
Thank you, Dr. Ward. So we're requesting the $500,000 to execute on our mission and growth goals. And more specifically, this will help us to make sure that we recruit, train, and deploy and support our Corps members in a quality manner. It'll help us to build our team in order to do that. Worth noting, next year, we're going to be focusing specifically on K-3 literacy. So our Corps members will be providing K-3 literacy tutoring to students across the state. We're targeting working with 25 districts and having 250 Corps members or more. And we're doing all of this in alignment with the State Board of Education strategic plans and with DPI. And the work that you have launched with North Carolina Education Corps really is pulling off what we would call a triple play. It's COVID response, it's job creation and human capital development, and it's catalyzing educational equity and opportunity. So with the COVID response, there's a real focus here on learning recovery, learning time loss recovery, and making sure that our Corps members are providing support to teachers and students and school administrators in an immediate way. And then related to job creation, this is a great opportunity for engaging community members, as well as employing Corps members to be able to provide additional support to school districts across the state. And really school districts like Vance County, Dr. Jackson's district, the local school districts are the real heroes in all of this. We're just partners able to support them. Our Corps members are having a blast supporting the students that they're working with and are looking forward to continuing to do that. We see North Carolina Education Corps as an opportunity not only to get more community members engaged in supporting students, but also see this as an opportunity for a few of our Corps members to get a taste of what it might like to be, teachers or counselors or school administrators in their future careers. And then, of course, all of this is really aligned with the State Board of Education's 2025 strategic goals that are grounded in the principles of equity and whole child. So our request today is for the $500,000 grant so we can continue our work and make you proud.
Board members, I apologize for the fact that in reading over the names of the board of directors, in an effort to be brisk, I went right over the name of Tony Jackson. I do apologize for that. He's a wonderful member of our board of directors.
Thank you very much. And just the proposal for the board liaisons is we would have Dr. Anna Townsend Smith serve as the liaison on behalf of the board to the Board of Advisors, and James Ford, who has earlier been misnamed a doctor, but he's on his way. So that would also be part of this motion. Are there questions and comments for Dr. Ward or for John Paul Smith? Or for Superintendent Truitt, since she's on the board as well? All right, not hearing any. Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Vice Chair Duncan. The only thing I'd add to this great report is the funds that are sitting in the North Carolina Education Fund were funds contributed by philanthropists for the North Carolina Education Corps. So the Education Fund was a holding fund while this enterprise was under the direction of State Board. Now that it's moving to an independent and self-governing nonprofit, it makes sense for those funds to be transferred.
Fortunately, Dr. Townsend Smith had the foresight to start a 501c3 process long ago, because it does take quite a while now. So thank you for that work. All right, not hearing anything else, let's go on to Biz Op 6, the Educational Workforce Innovation Commission report. This is an action item. We heard the report from Jacqueline Wyatt at our last meeting. Ms. Wyatt is, I believe, on the line. If there are any questions, and if there are any, let me open the floor for any follow-up questions to the report that we heard last month. Not hearing any. Biz Op 7 is the annual report on supplanting low wealth supplemental funds and small school system supplemental funds. It is a consent item. Alexis Schaus is here to report on it if there are any questions, but the bottom line is there are no funds to report from any of the counties, and that's a good report for this one. Then we have the monthly budget report, of which I think a deeper dive on the monthly budget report is forthcoming in the near future. But unless there's any questions on the report right now, we'll keep moving. Next item is the agency vacancy report, and I think Ron Paxton is on the line. And we do have one thing that Mr. Paxton would like to show from the report. He's done a lot of good work to help us understand the report here in terms of what the personnel situation is. So, Mr. Paxton, I send it to you.
Thank you. One of the things that I wanted to look at is the trend lines that we're showing, which
we're
okay. How's that? I'm still echoing. Is this any better? How about now? Can anyone hear me? Hello. Hello, is anyone there? Is anyone there? Anyone else? Hello?
This is Dr. Taylor. I can actually hear you. I don't know if anyone else can, but
Okay.
I'm still on. I can hear you.
And this is Maureen. I can hear you as well.
Yeah, I
can hear him. This
Okay, good. And I don't hear the echo anymore, so something good just happened. I'm not sure what, but I'll take it. So the two things that I wanted to look at was, and we've talked about the total vacancies and the vacancies by age range. And we've got, some trends that are favorable. It looks like our improvement, we're continuing to improve in both reducing total vacancies and shifting the age of those vacancies from those vacancies that are over a year old to those that are less than 90 days, which is where they should be. Another point that I wanted to make was that we did add 14 new district and regional support positions, and these are 14 brand new positions, and that is what has taken our total vacancies up to that 85 number. Even with that 85, our trend is still an improving trend, and had we not added those 14 positions, we would have been at around at a 71. So I want to go back to our last meeting when Chairman Davis said, let's look at the numbers and celebrate together. And I think when we look at these, there is some reason for celebration. We're looking at sustaining improvement, and our plan is to continue to do that. And I appreciate the time, Vice Chair Duncan. And if anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to answer. Can anyone still hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, it appears to be stuck. Dr. Townsend Smith, can you hear me?
Ron, this is Catherine Edmonds. I can hear you, but I can't hear anything that's going on in the boardroom.
No, I can't either. So
Okay.
that's odd.
Just texted Dr. Townsend Smith to let her know that we're not seeing the slides move and we can't hear anything, so that she knows that we're out of the loop right now.
Okay.
All right, everybody, I think we're back up and running. Sorry about that, Chair.
Where can I tell my friend that the car floated?
Are we back on?
Okay, everybody, we're back on.
See if Mr. Paxton can hear me now.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Mr. Paxton?
1 second.
Hello? Can you hear me?
It's quite fortuitous, Dustin. It's staying on top of the bucket and local stance. 16 and Senator Sharp.
Hello, I can hear you, but I don't know if you can hear me.
I can hear
yes.
you. Can you hear me?
Okay, I can.
All right, thank you, sir. I think we're ready to go, Chair.
We were celebrating your positive trends.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I'm pretty happy about that myself. We're going to keep them going.
Thank you so much. All right. So we're in the home stretch, team, and we have a couple of items before we get to our action items. The first being adoption of the Strong Schools Toolkit. And before we get to that, I'd like to go back to our earlier presentation from DHHS and ask Dr. Stegall to share with us guidance for our public school units concerning prom and graduation activities. Dr. Stegall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This will be very quick. Prom and graduation are around the corner. Some are starting as soon as this weekend. And that's a nice milestone for many high school students. And the Department of Health and Human Services has given some guidance around gatherings such as prom and graduation. DHHS does not recommend traditional proms, which can be linked to high-risk activities where predominantly unvaccinated students could be in close proximity for an extended period of time. However, decisions are at the local level, discretion of the local leaders. So superintendents, local boards, local health officials will have to meet to discuss feasibility of having proms, for example, whether they should be indoors or outdoors. Obviously, in the ideal world, from DHHS's perspective, a 6-foot social distancing between participants. I have a high school senior daughter. I told her if she adopted my dance moves, people would definitely stay at least 6 feet away from her. So there's always those strategies. But again, the decisions are at the local level. The capacity limits, you'll see that on the directions, there are no specific capacity limits listed because that is, again, a local decision based on legal counsel and local health officials. Local districts need to determine how safe they feel that space is and how much room they have to operate. A couple things that need to be taken away is that all events must comply with the current executive order and Strong School Toolkit that you're about to adopt. Anyone 5 years or older must wear a face mask covering when they're not eating and so forth. Outdoors is preferred for these events, this being prom and graduation, and there's some doing outdoor proms. But if it is indoors, they encourage social distancing to the greatest extent possible and try to continue using ventilation techniques by opening doors, anything they can to outdoor ventilation into indoor areas. Continue use signage and social distancing protocols, as I said, hand sanitizers and possible. The next slide, as you see, rapid test utilization is encouraged in advance of the events for staff and students who may be participating. It is encouraged that they do encourage districts and schools to consider symptom screenings for adults at entry post and provide hand sanitizers. And if possible, stagger arrival times to allow proper distancing so that not everyone's coming in at the same time. and a plan to develop seating which keeps family units together, but spacing groups of families apart as much as possible. None of this is necessarily new. It's what we've been discussing. Again, the key takeaway is local decisions will decide if they, any specifics around capacity or distancing or it's indoors or outdoors, that local council and local health officials be your go-to for those decisions. I'll be glad to answer any questions if I can.
Questions from my colleagues? Hearing none, thank you, Dr. Stigall. Colleagues, the other item contained in this particular agenda item, I'll call your attention to what's on eBoard, both the supporting document around the March 24th Strong Schools Toolkit, as well as the recommendation, which is the motion we'll be voting on. It reads, consistent with Session Law 2021-4, the North Carolina State Board of Education approves as official guidance for in-person instruction for the remainder of the 2020-2021 academic year, unless otherwise extended or modified, for all elementary and secondary public schools in North Carolina, the requirements outlined in the Strong Schools North Carolina Public Health Toolkit K through 12, issued by the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services as it existed on March 4th, 2021, and further the board approved the March 24th amendments to that toolkit, as well as any other amendments presented to the board as of this date, provided such amendments are not inconsistent with the requirements of Session Law 2021-4. Any questions on this motion? Very good. Hearing none, then that will be before us for action in just a few moments. We'll now move to our final item, which is extenuating circumstances committee recommendations, and I'll turn to Dr. Townsend Smith for this item.
Yes, sir. So one of the board's committees and in policies is that of extenuating circumstances to make decisions on teachers who are having hardships achieving and maintaining licensure. And so to help run that work, it is chaired by Dr. Oxendine. We haven't had a vice chair there for some time. And we also have that committee filled with representatives from the field. And so today the recommendation from the chair will be to appoint Mr. Wendell Hall to that committee as vice chair, and then to appoint Ms. Maureen Stover as a teacher rep to extenuating circumstances so that committee could do its work and make recommendations to the board.
Thank you, Dr. Townsend Smith. Any questions on that recommendation to appoint Mr. Hall or Ms. Stover? Hearing none, I would just add my thanks to Dr. Oxendine for leading this activity and supporting our teachers in this way. Board members, seeing that there are no other new business items, we'll now vote on any item requiring action from your committee reports. A thorough discussion and report was provided on each item, including any respective consent items. You'll recall that any item on the consent agenda is primarily not complex and may have come to the board for discussion in a prior month. I note also that board members have seen these consent agenda items for at least a week. At this time, I ask if there's a request to remove any item from our consent action or action on first reading items for separate vote. Hearing none, I seek a request, a motion to approve the following: the March 3 and 4, 2020-21 meeting minutes, the March 15, 2021 meeting minutes, the March 25th, 2021 meeting minutes, and the following committee items: EICS 1 through 5, SLA 6 and 7, BizOp 1 through 7, HRS 1, and the IPL and ILT licensure approvals discussed in closed session. Residential school, our recommendations also discussed in closed session. The Strong Schools Toolkit, based on the motion I read previously. The North Carolina Education for Liaison recommendations and grant request. and the Extenuating Circumstances Committee appointments as presented. Is there a motion to that effect? Motion by Ms. Kamnitz. Is there a second?
Second, Mr. Keenan.
Second by Mr. Keenan. Any discussion on this motion? Hearing none, Dr. Townsend Smith, we call the roll to capture the vote.
Yes, sir. Dr. Oxendine?
Yes.
Ms. Kamnitz?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers?
Yes.
Ms. White?
Yes.
Mr. Ford?
Yes.
Treasurer Falwell? Lieutenant Governor?
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan?
Yes.
Chair Davis?
Yes, motion carries. My thanks to all of you, staff and presenters for this April 8th, 2021 meeting. This concludes our committee work, and I remind everyone again that our planning and work session will be held May 11th through the 13th here at DPI, and we look forward to engaging together in this learning and working experience. I now ask for a motion to adjourn this April 8th, 2021 meeting. Motion by Ms. White. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Hall. Dr. Townsend Smith.
Yes, sir. Dr. Oxendine?
Yes.
Ms. Kamnitz?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Hall? Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Tipton Rogers?
Yes.
Ms. White?
Yes.
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 Falwell? Lieutenant Governor?
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan?
Yes.
Chair Davis?
Yes. Motion carries. We stand adjourned. Thank you.
Now I'm going to listen to the card.
Live mics.
It sounded great.
Live mics.
Five max.